Shalom. Yeah, this thing is just taking so much time to set up. I need to put these. No, nicht. Oh, Abdullah Akiva is here. Good morning.
Como vai?
Graças a Deus. Baruch Hashem. Jewish music, that's it.
Yeah.
Nah, this is not good. It's good enough. It's the cord. Be careful with the cord because the cord is going to make it. No. Okay, it's good enough, and that's it. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Mem. We left off on Daf Mem Amud Aleph, 11 lines from the top of the Amud. The Gemara concluded properly explaining the case of the Mishnah, that we are entering the year of Shemitah. The presumption is that all of the Daled Minim were picked after Rosh Hashanah, before Sukkot. And being that a Lulav, as we determined, goes the year, its year, whether it's from the 6th year, whether it's considered the product of the 7th year, is determined when it emerged. So therefore, since it emerged on the 6th year, there is no problem in buying from the Amoritz, the Lulav, including the Hadassim and the Aravis. Masha Enke by the Esrig, as we concluded that our Tana follows the opinion that an Esrig its year is determined by when it was picked. Basar likita, like a vegetable, since it was picked on the 7th year, yes, it's considered Peiroi Shvi'is, and we have this rule, Midrabanan, that one may not purchase from an Amoritz Peirois, because the Amoritz may not take the money and use it simply to buy food. He might store the money, he might put the money in a bank account. Now, that's his sin, but we may not lift ne'iver lisit in merchel, so to say, help him to do so. That's why the Mishnah explained that the esrig the value of the esrog, either we should receive the esrog as a gift, but if he doesn't want to gift it to us, then we do this havla'ah. He overcharges for the lulav. The Amaretz gets the sum total what he wanted anyways, but we actually only paid for the lulav and not for the esrog. The question will be that this entire sugya is built on the premise that if the lulav would have been considered, and when it will be considered a product of the 7th year, then yes, it will have the sanctity of Shemitah. The question is why? The lulav is a branch. The lulav is wood. The lulav is not food. It's not a fruit. Question is, does firewood have Shvi'is sanctity or not? And that will be the first part of Daf Mem. We're going to learn one fundamental rule, and that is that when does something have in it the sanctity of Shemitah? If these are the words, Hana'asai ubiyuroi shavan, which means that when you use it and it then at the same time, it coincides with its consumption, like for example, when you eat food, so you are consuming it, it's becoming miyesh la'ayin, and it is exactly then that you derive benefit from it. That is that which is included in the Kedusha of Shemitah. However, as we will give examples, just for example, firewood. When you burn firewood, when it's being consumed, you're not using it yet. People would then wait for it to turn into coals, and only then would they use those coals that began as firewood as whatever it is that they need to warm up the oven, just for example. So since Hana'asai ubiyurei are not shaveh, at least as we will learn, it's a machlekes tanoim, but we will follow you the sugya that it is not included in kedusha shvi'is. Firewood, at least according to some tanoim, are not imbued with the sanctity of Shemitah. However, a lulav was primarily used for a broom. When you use a broom, as you're using it, first of all, you're deriving benefit from it, and it is exactly then that, some of the leaves are falling out, some of the leaves are running out. The benefit and its consumption is happening at the same time. So therefore, a lulav is included in Kedusha Shemitah, which is why we needed to explain that our Mishnah, speaking about the scenario where the lulav grew, it had its chanata, it emerged on the 6th year. On Daf Mem Amid Beis, we're going to learn another principle that we mentioned in the beginning of the sugya of Shemitah, and that is that the Kedusha of Shemitah is transferred to money. So if you have that which grew on Shemitah and you sold it, the money also is bound by the same rules of the food, even though it's not like your typical deconsecration by Hegdish. If something has Kedushas Mammon and you deconsecrate it by the Beis HaMikdash, so then the Kedusha leaves the original item and it goes into the new item. By Shemitah, as we will learn, that which actually grew will never lose its sanctity, and all of the restrictions that therefore it will have to abide by concerning that paytas. But when you either sell it and deconsecrate it, as we'll see there is a machlokes, then its kedusha will be imbued on money or on the foods in which you transferred the kedusha to. And finally, we're going to have on Daf Mem Amud Beis a machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, both concerning Shemitah and concerning Ma'aser Sheni, whether it could be deconsecrated on living animals. And as we will see, Rav Meir says yes, and the Chachamim say no, and much, much more. Let us start on Daf Mem Amud Aleph. Again, we left off 11 lines from the top of the Amud. We are learning an entire daf all about Shemitah. The Gemara begins by telling us that Taima, the way we explained our Mishnah, that one is allowed to purchase the lulav from the Amaretz is because, like we mentioned, lulav will follow its chanata, and being that it emerged on the tree on the 6th year, so we consider it a bar shishis. It's only hanichnas l'shviyasu, which is why it does not have kedusha. Which implies that if, like we mentioned, what would happen if you're buying that dalad minim in the beginning of the 8th year, then everything will be flipped. Because then fakir, the esrik will be okay to purchase, because like we mentioned, an esrik, our Tana holds, goes basar likita. If it was harvested on the 8th year, it's no longer Shemitah. But if the lulav will be classified as a product of the 7th year, hadashviz, then indeed it will be kadosh. Now let's appreciate, in other words, lulav is not food. Yet the halacha will be that you may not buy it from the Amaretz because of that rabbinic rule that ein moislin de make peiros shvi'is la'am ha'aretz. The question is why? Esrig is a food. We get that. Lulav is not. Lulav should have the same status as firewood. Amai eitzim ba'almahu. The lulav is just wood. And isn't there the rule that the eitzim ein bahem mishum kedusha shvi'is, that firewood has no kedusha at all? And where do I get that from? The Tanya, it's really a brayso. And the brayso begins speaking about aleikanim, leaves of cane reeds, or va'ale gefanim, if you have leaves of a grapevine. Says the brayso that if shegavavam l'choiva al pnei hasada, if you gathered it, gavavam means you gathered. L'choiva means for storage. You gathered it, you're not going to eat it. You gathered it for storage from the field. We're speaking about on the year of Shemitah. Says the brayso, if liktan la'achila, if you gathered it for food. Now, people don't eat these reeds, but they give it to animals. This is very important. Even animal food, its food for sure is included with all of the rules and regulations of the Shemitah year. So then, yesh behem mishum kedusha shvi'is. But says the brayso explicitly that if liktam la'etzim, if a person gathered these twigs, these reeds, simply to have more firewood, ein behem mishum kedusha shvi'is. So the question is, it's not going to make our Mishnah problematic, but basically the Gemara is saying, why did you have to go into the whole thing that the eitzim, they emerged on the 6th year? B'chlal, a lulav should never be a problem. It should not be affected by the sanctity of Shemitah. Answers the Gemara, that's not true. Firewood, clearly, at least this kind of holds, doesn't have kedusha shvi'is. A lulav does. Why? Because since it says, and we're quoting here a pasuk from Parshas Bahar, lochem la'achla baruch atah adinoi Eloheinu melech haolam sha'ar kol nivdvari. Now this is amazing. This is the beginning of Parshas Bahar. We're learning about the dinim of Shemitah, and that which grows is lochem. The word lochem implies for anything you want. It's yours. Then the word la'achla is a very limiting word. La'achla means you can only use it for consumption. So says Chazal, lochem dum yada achila, which means that it's not that you may only eat it, but it has to be similar to eating it. What's eating? Misha hana asoy ubiyurei shavam. When you eat it, you benefit from it. And as you are benefiting from the food, at that moment, it's being consumed. So if and when benefit, guys, that's the key, coincides with its becoming meyesh la'ayin. If it coincides at the time that you benefit, it is then that it gets consumed. That is what you use it for. Yatsu eitzim, firewood, shahano asam. When do people derive benefit from the firewood? You don't right away put food into the oven. It's not the way it works. First, you burn up the wood. It becomes coal. So it already got consumed. And later you have hana'ah. Okay. So that is what, so says Rashi. Let's look inside Rashi right here towards the end of the narrow lines. Umahach drasha nami yalfinan she'ein shvi'is noyeg ela bepri ha'oimed lahana ois halalu ha'chinami midrash krava hoisa shabbos oris leheges b'mashal lachem la'achla. And therefore what? Firewood, Rashi's girsa, is not eitzim, but Rashi's girsa is yatsu atzei hasaka shahana asam acher beyuram mishanasu gechalim, only then oifen bahem. So firewood is not included in kedusha shemitah. However, lulav is different. Why is lulav different? Rashi says people primarily would use a lulav as a broom, and there is a certain level of consumption of wear and tear that happens when you use it as a broom. Some of the leaves fall off, some of the leaves get rubbed out, and you have hana'ah while it's being used. So a lulav is like food. It's taka not food, but it's enough lochem, similar to la'achla. So therefore, lulav is included in all of the rules and regulations of Shemitah. And yes, we needed to explain that our Mishnah, which allows you to buy the lulav from the Amaretz, even though there is a rule that ein moislin, the may peiros la'amaretz b'shvi'is, that's because the lulav is classified as a 6th year lulav. A 7th year lulav is like food and it has kedusha shmita. Because hana'asai ubiyuroi happen together. That's the Rashi. Ava lulav, the last narrow line. Iker hana'asai lechabed asabayis. People primarily use it as a broom. And when you use it as a broom, it is then that it gets, gets consumed, it gets burnt up, meaning gets ruined. And vidame lahanois achila. Now hold on, how does that explain the Braisa? Says the Rashi, just concluding that the case of the Braisa, when you have aleikonim, leaves of canes, when you have leaves of grapevines, sometimes they are used for firewood, sometimes they are used for a broom. Sometimes they're used for food. So therefore, your intent for what you are gathering it will determine whether it's included in the rules of Shemitah or not. Very good. Let's go back in the Gemara. Oy bazoi, frek the Gemara, in the Mishkan, there are very oily woods. There are certain woods that are so oily that people would use the wood itself as a torch. They would light it and it would burn as a torch. If the wood is not oily, it would burn up too quick. You understand? But such a wood, now you use it not for firewood, you're using that as a torch. There, your benefit, your hana'ah, does coincide with the time that it's being consumed. According to what we are learning, if someone will gather oily woods on Shemitah to use as a torch, then this should be included in the rules of Shemitah. It should have the Kedusha Shemitah, Hanasai Ubiyurei Shava. And therefore, and who says not? Why didn't the Braisa stipulate that if someone gathered wood for that, then it does have the Kedusha of Shemitah? The Braisa only gave the two options, eating, right, or firewood. There should be this third option. And that's a chumrah, if you had such an intent. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, that stam eitzim lahasaka heinoim. Since the majority of the people gather wood for firewood, Rashi says, even if you did gather oily wood that you will use for a torch. Rashi doesn't use the words batla daita eitzel b'nei adam, but Rashi says, I don't care what your intent is. We will classify all eitzim as firewood. And therefore, since b'chlal by firewood, ein hana'asei ubiyurei shava, no firewood is imbued with any sanctity of Shemitah. There's no restrictions on that wood. Okay. So lulav for sure, we established, is included in the rules of Shemitah. As of now, we quoted the Braisa that says that firewood is not, as we explained. Says the Gemara, you should know that even firewood, to say azay lakula, that since it's just firewood, there's no kedusha Shemitah, it's really subject to amachlekes tanoim. The eitzim lasaka tanoim, the tanyom ein moistrin peiros shvius. A person may not use the product that grew on Shemitah, not lemishra, not to put it inside a soaking pool, nor inside a kevusa, inside a laundering pool. We're speaking specifically about wine that came from grapes that grew halachically in the year of Shemitah, and it was beneficial, whether you are soaking materials, whether you are laundering materials, to have some wine in it. Problem is, my friends, when you put the wine into that pool, the wine itself gets ruined. You b'chlal may not use it for that. So says the Tanach. Rabbi Yossi holds you are allowed to. What's underlying this machlokes? And the Gemara explains this is really similar. They will also argue regarding firewood. It will be connected to the same logic. My Tama the Tanakama, right? That limits, that does not allow you to use Peter Shvi'is for laundering. The Amar Kra Gem Lo Achla, and he learns Lo Chem Lo Achla. No, you can only eat it. You can't ruin it by putting it into the Mishra V'loy LeKavusa. My Tama the Rabbi Yossi, like we mentioned before, he's medayek the word lochem. It's like a stira. Lochem means for anything. Lochem means only to eat. Lochem l'chol tzarchechem. Va'afilu l'mishra u'lechavusa. Now, each one has to explain what the other word means. U'letanakama, ayat says for you, it should allow you, it should be more permissible. So he says, like we learned above, hu lochem dumedachilom, which means, when are you allowed to use it? Only misha hana osoi ubiyuroi shava. Again, that the benefit has to coincide with its consumption. Yatsu mishra ukavusa, since first it gets ruined. The benefit of laundering clothing, the benefit of soaking clothing, you only get when you wear it. That's a lot later. Doesn't happen at the same time. So you can't use it. Now, hold on. Now we have to go and add, like Rashi writes in the bottom, now that we showed that the Tanakh subscribes to this rule, that what is included in Kedusha Shemitah, only that Misha Hana Osoy Ubi Urei Shava, so Oy Bazoi, by the same token, firewood is completely excluded from the dinim of Shemitah, as we learned above. And that will coincide with the Braisa that we learned above. That if likton, right, if a person gathered it le'etzim, ein bohem mishum kedusha shvius. But all of that is based on us accepting this hana'asoi ubiyurei shava. Rabbi Yossi will disagree with that. How do I know that? Because Rabbi Yossi says that that you are allowed to soak it. In other words, because lachem means you can use everything for Shemitah, which would also mean that everything is included in Kedusha Shemitah. The Torah says for eating, it has to exclude something. It says la'achlo, no, that's something else. That's for one thing. There's one thing you may not use Shemitah product for, and that is la'achila v'loy melugma. Melugma is some sort of medicinal paste that people would use some foods for. That is something that you may not use. Anything that grew Shemitah, anything that has in it Kedusha Shemitah may not be used l'refuah for any sort of medical application. Now, 1 second. The Braisa itself says, how do you know that? Maybe the Torah is saying to disallow you to use wine, to put it into this laundering pool. Maybe it's ela v'loy l'chvusam, so says the Braisa itself. Lochem is inclusive. So mani mekayim lo'achla must be lo'achla v'lo'ilem. Lochem is inclusive, lo'achla is exclusive. We are excluding medicinal usage. We are including that you dafka may even use it as a detergent. Says the Braiso, Mara Isol Rabbi says Sakabusa Lohitzias Amalugma Daf Mem Amid Beis. Why don't we say the opposite? Answers the Braiso, Marbania Sakabusa. If I have to pick and choose, I would rather include that which is shava b'chaladam. Guys, all people eat, right? Every person identifies with this usage. Something is made for consumption. Masha enkin melugma, anything that's used for medicinal purposes is not shava l'chaladam. It's only for people who need to have it for shalema. She'ena shava l'chaladam. Now, guys, what we have to add now is so since Chevra Rabbi Yossi, right, does not subscribe to be hana'asoi ubiyurei shava, he doesn't subscribe to that. So my friends, Rabbi Yossi will not exclude firewood from the kedusha of Shemitah. So that's very nice. So in other words, the Gemara we began asking today, why b'chal is lulav included in the kedusha Shemitah? Why do I need it for it to be the bar shishis? Now we have that, according to Rabbi Yossi, we need, because even if it's only viewed like firewood, even firewood has Kedusha Shemitah. Okay. And now that we have this machlokes, says the Gemara, who is the author? Man, Tana, Lohadu, Tana, Rabbanan, guys, 3 lines from the top of Aman, Rafmem, Amud Beis, that V'l'achla, V'loy l'melugma. Lochem l'achma, you can use the product of Shemitah, but not to use it as some sort of ointment, some sort of medicinal ointment. Also, when the Torah says la'achila, not leziluf. Ziluf is that it was common, especially when they would have these earthen floors, that to give the environment a good aroma, they would take aromatic wines, they would take wines that would smell good, and they would sprinkle it on the floor. You may not use wine from Shemitah for ziluf because you're not eating it. La'achila v'loy la'asois mimenu apik toisin. Don't turn it into some sort of substance that was used to induce vomiting. The word apik toisin is a composite of apik means to take out, tfei means extra, and zun is food. So you may not use it into such a substance. So says the Gemara, who authored this Braisa? It must be Rabbi Yossi. Because you know what the Braisa did not mention, which was the most common use. The most common use was people would take wine and they would throw it into the laundering pool. That was a normal thing. The fact that this Braisa does not disallow you, it means the Braisa allows you to do it. The Braisa allows you to do it. is a chanaya, the irabanan, ha'ikanami mishra ukavusa, that should not have been allowed. But we are allowing it, so that is indeed the shita of Rebbe Yosi, Yavaldik Moisrin. All right, that ended the first part of today's shiur. And now, let's say like this. If you remember on Daf Lamed Tes, when we spoke about the Mishnah, you can't buy the Daled Minim from the Amma Aretz, we were focusing on the Esek. What happens if you bought it? What happens if you violated this rabbinic rule of Ein Moisrin, the May Peres of Shemitah to the Amma Aretz? What do? So in the end of Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph, it says, then the buyer, now there's money in the hands of the Amma Aretz that has the sanctity of Shemitah. The Amma Aretz might put it in his bank account. He may not use it for food right away and to consume it before this man biur. So it says, that the buyer has to now be machalalit. So there's a concept of chilul. Chilul means, what's normally chilul? By kegdish, chilul means that if you said, this is Bedek Habayis, your coffee, the Bedek Habayis doesn't need your coffee. So you deconsecrate it on something that the temple needs, either an item or on money. Now, when you do chilul, let's say by hegdish, chilul means that you remove it from the original item and it goes into that which now is holy. First of all, rule number one, just begin with that. By Shemitah, anything that grew in the ground halachically on the year of Shemitah, even though its sanctity could be transferred, but the item that grew itself will never lose the sanctity of Shemitah. And with all of the restrictions, like we mentioned, some of them you have to use it only la'achla. You can only eat it until the time of biur. If you sell it, you can only sell small amounts of it, and the money that you receive, you can only use for food again. You can't make business, meaning selling it and then putting your money away for profit. Doesn't work that way. So if you made a transference of kedusha, rule number one, it never leaves the product that grew, but it's effective. It will also be invested in the money, let's say, that you use to buy it. The question is, when does such a transference happen? Option number one, only when you did a sale. Option number two, even without a sale, the way it's done by Ma'aser Sheni, you just make a declaration, made the kedusha of this, go into that. So that will be here, the machloikis Amoraim, that will also continue into tomorrow. And let's read it inside. Two opinions, Rabbi Elazar, the Amoira versus Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Yes, there is a concept of chilul shvi'is, not deconsecrating, not taking away the kedusha from the origin, but yes, imbuing it in the new item. But that only happens elo derach mekach, only if there was a sale. Now, before we go on, if that's the case, how will Rabbi Elazar understand the Gemara on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph from the bottom? When we said that if a chaver, by mistake, he bought product from an Amma Aretz, with all the cases, even though the Amma Aretz is abiding by leaving his field abandoned, but you can't buy more than the value of 3 meals. He bought more than the value of 3 meals. So the Gemara says, then he has to be machalal that on payers that the chaver has in his house. According to Rabbi Elazar, that won't work. He's not doing a sale then. He's just making a declaration, made the kedusha, go into, it won't even work. So Tosfos on top of the Amid, as Tosfos writes also on Daf Lamed Tes, right? Let's read inside the top Tosfos. Ein shvius mischalelas. This is according to Rabbi Elazar. Ela derech mekach. The Tanya Lael asks Tosfos Sabraisa that ve'im macher, if someone by mistake he bought stuff from an Amma Aretz, then yomer mo'os halalu. Now the Amma Aretz has money, so he's saying that may the kedusha of the money be mechulel on the payers that I have in my house. Won't work. Yeah, theoretically it won't work, but in this case, the Chachamim gave you a penalty. You chaver, you should have known that you may not do business with an Amma Aretz, with produce that grew on the Shemitah year, if it's more than the value of 3 meals. If you did it, you're going to have to lose. But this is going against the rule. Normally, just making such a declaration, which works by Bedek Habayis, it works by Ma'aser Sheni, but by Shemitah, it doesn't work. Another detail, just to speak out. If it would have worked, then the money that the Amaretz would have had in his house would become deconsecrated. I want to emphasize that. Even though we mentioned the first rule is that when it comes to Shemitah, when you transfer the Kedusha, it doesn't leave the original product. That's only on the original product. That which grew in the earth, Shemitah produce, will never become deconsecrated. But if the Kedusha was transferred into money or into another food item, then if you make another transference, then it will go into the third item and it will leave the second item. So if not for Rabbi Lazar's insistence that ein shvius mischalelas ela derech mekach, then the money that the Amaretz would have in his house would taka become deconsecrated. You chap this because the money didn't grow. The original product grew. The original product never loses its kedusha, but it has the power to imbue the kedusha in something else, according to Rabbi Lazar, only if there was a sale. That something else can again be transferred into a third item, but when that happens, it leaves the second item because the second item didn't grow. That's the whole on it.
What's the third item here?
I'll give you an example. If let's say I'm Aretz, he grew apples and he went over to you and he exchanged the apples for your meat. So the apples remain bound by all of the rules of Shemitah, and so does the meat. If it was a barter, that's called a sale, even according to Rabbi Lazar. But then if you went ahead and you took the meat and you exchanged the meat for fish, now the meat is nothing. It's some kosher meat, but it's not. There's no limitations. The fish will have the kedusha of Shemitah, and ad infinitum. Then the fish to a chicken. The original item always remains holy, and then the last item has kedusha Shemitah.
So the fish then needs to have two transfers.
So it doesn't matter how many transfers. The original and the last one, But how does it transfer over? Says Rabbi Lazar, only through a sale. And Rabbi Yochanan says, not only through a sale, but also through any type of verbal declaration, which is of chilul, which is of deconsecration. Bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. So again, even though you don't really deconsecrate the original, but if you put two items one near the other, and you say, you know what, I want the kedusha of my apples that grew I want it to go into the oranges. It works. It works, not that the apples are deconsecrated, but the oranges are. It gets transferred even just through a declaration. My Talmud Rabbi Elazar, this is the Amoira, because it says, again in Parshas Bahar, now even though this pasuk is regarding Yovel, but like Rashi points out, that the rule, Yovel is also Shemitah. It's a Shemitah plus. There are other rules that are unique to Yovel, but Yovel is also like Shemitah. The produce that grows have the kedusha of Yovel, which here is similar to Shemitah. So it says, B'shnas haYovel hazois. There we're adding, the pasuk just concludes, Toshuvu ish elachuzasi. We're not focusing on those words at all. However, right after that, the Samach Le'ei, the Torah speaks about v'chisin kerum mimkar, etc. The Torah speaks about someone who's doing a sale. And this is called doirishin semuchem. The fact that the Torah juxtaposed these two dinim, this is the way we interpret it, that derech mekach v'loy derech chilul. Amazing. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan, my Tama, why is he allowing for the transference to happen the way it happens really by all other holy items? Not only through a sale, also just through a declaration, because it says here also, ki yovel hi kodesh. Now again, kodesh ilochem, but just focus on the word kodesh. Kodesh here means hegdish, means it just like hegdish. Ma kodesh, just like by hegdish. Like we mentioned, how does the gizbar taka deconsecrate it, and the kedusha goes somewhere? It cannot just fly away. It's bein derech mekach. Someone can buy things from the Bedek Habayis, bein derech chilul, or even if it's only just through a verbal declaration. Af shvis. This process of the kedusha being imbued in something else not only happens derech mekach like Rabbi Elazar, but also bein derech chilul. And now again, each one has to interpret the source of the other. Rabbi Yochanan, ki simkeru mimkar, which is juxtaposed my avidloi. What does he learn from this juxtaposition? And he's also doider smuchin. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan will learn from that juxtaposition, like it was taught by Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, the Tanach. The Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Come and see. Come and see how serious or how harsh is someone who violates that which is called only the dust of Shemitah. Now, we have this in so many other areas, right? There's avak ribis, avak lashon hara. Avak means that there is the primary violation, and then there are things that are not as serious, but they're called like the dust of. Avak is not limited to rabbinic rules. By ribis, we will not use the word avak if it's biblical ribis. But over here, Shemitah, the proper Shemitah is if I am violating a negative commandment. Then I'm violating Shvius proper. Anything that is prohibited, even if it's midoiraisa, but it's not because God says thou shall not. Like, for example, selling produce of Shemitah to gather the money. Doing business, doing schayra, again, we learned yesterday, you can sell a little bit, as long as it's just another way for you to get money to eat right now. But proper business, to make profit, to save the profit is prohibited. It's prohibited biblically, but you're not violating a lav. It's like, it's called a lav haba mechlal asay. The Torah says, lochem lo'acha. It's for you to eat and not for anything other than eating. Okay, that's called. So come and see that even if a person only violates the avak of shvi'is, he's going to be punished. And what's the punishment? That's the juxtaposition. That if a person adam noisev and noisim bepeder shvi'is, what happens at the end? L'soif moicheres metaltol of askelav, he will become impoverished initially, that he'll have to sell his belongings. Shneman, as it says, that's the juxtaposition. And by the way, Rashi brings us in Chumash. And then if a person doesn't do tshuva, right, that's the whole, then after he sells his property, then he'll have to sell his property, God forbid. All of this begins with not honoring the Shemitah and the Yovel. And God forbid, at the end, the person will have to sell himself. So he learns that from the juxtaposition, but not that we limit the power of transference only to a sale. No, according to Rabbi Yochanan, any type of chilul, that same type of chilul that works for Hegdish and for Ma'aser Sheni will be the same type of chilul that's going to work for Peiros Shvi'is. Now, for Rabbi Lazar, hi krod Rabbi Yochanan. The Torah says kodesh, right? Kodesh ti'alochem. So Rabbi Yochanan learns it's like Hegdish. My Yavidle, he also has a limit. Ki yovel he kodesh, ma kodesh toifes as damav. How do you know that Bachlal you can transfer the kedusha to something new? That is what we learned from Hegdish. That if Berek Habayis has an item that's holy, and that kedusha is exchanged for, it's imbued into something else, the second item taka becomes holy. Af shvi is toifeses as domel. Okay. And now says the Gemara, I want you to know that this machlokas amoyroim is actually a machlokas tanoim. Tanya kavosa de Rabbi Lazar and Vitanya kavosa de Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya kavosa de Rabbi Lazar. Shvi is toifeses as domeha. And indeed, from this pasuk is not being learned the way Rabbi Yochanan learns it. Shenemar ki yovel hi kodesh ti'alochem ma kodesh toifes as domeha af, and therefore va'asur. All of the rules of Hegdish will go into that money, even though the person was never magdish the money. I don't care. Someone, the gizbar, transferred the money, transferred the kedusha into the money or into another item. Af shvi is toifeses as domeha, and the new item into which this transference happens will be asur, which means it will be bound to the same rules and regulations of Shemitah. However, there is one huge difference. That when you are machalel hegdish, the original hegdish becomes mechulo. It becomes chulin. It becomes deconsecrated, but not by Shemitah. The item that grew never becomes deconsecrated. Ma kodesh toifes damav, and the original item is fully yoitzel chulin. Now, guys, I just want to take a quick pause. Yoitzel chulin is in the case of Berek Habayis. If you remember, if someone was magdish an animal that was at one point worthy, able to go on the Mizbeach, first of all, you can't deconsecrate it so quick. It has to first get blemished. And even after it gets blemished, and then you deconsecrate it, it's not like all of the Kedusha left. There is a residue of Kedusha. It's asur begizr va'avoida. There are restrictions on it. It doesn't contradict anything. There are details, but if it didn't, even there, it did go enough out l'chulin that the buyer can eat it. He can sell it. He can't sell it in the meat market, putting it on weights, but he can even sell it by approximation. It goes out l'chulin. Either the notch of kedusha substantially goes down, or it completely goes away. But by Shemitah, it's not that case. That's the key. That which grew on Shemitah, even if you're going to go with Rabbi Elazar, you can only transfer it through a sale. Make a sale. Doesn't help. The original item remains holy. The new item is holy. Same level of Kedusha. Now, Ima kodesh teifes as dama v'yotze l'chulin, af shvi'is teifeses as dama v'yotzas l'chulin, Talmud limit, it doesn't go out l'chulin. Why is that? Because the Torah says the words tihiyah, right? Ki yovel hi kodesh. Tihiyah, the word tihiyah means b'havayasa tehei. It so remains always. It's constant kedusha. So hakeitzad. So what exactly will happen? So that's the case. That lokach bepeiros shvi'is basar. Okay, mamash, what you asked. Let's say you own a field. Now in Shemitah, you don't own it. Everything is abandoned. So whether you picked it from your own field with everyone else, or you picked it from your neighbor's fields, it's the same thing. We are allowed to pick fruit of shvi'is for us to eat, as long as some of that is still in the fields. Okay. A person took those peiros, and like we mentioned, you are allowed to sell product of Shemitah. It's not the way people think. You can't do business, you can't sell it all, but you are limited. You can only sell a little bit, because really you're only selling that which grew to buy other food items, and you have to eat it right away. So he's giving an example. Someone is selling meat. He's charging, I don't know, for a steak, $50. So it's Shemitah. So we go to the field, we pick enough produce worth $50. We're allowed to do that from anyone's field, and we give it to the guy who sells meat. Even according to Rabbi Elazar now, knows there was a sale. So what happens? The fruit that grew remains imbued with Kedusha Shemitah. It doesn't leave it. So the example that Baraisa is giving is that the fruit and now the meat can only be eaten if this food type is still out there in the field for wild animals to eat. With all of the details, where is out there, that Eretz Yisrael is divided into 3 territories. There are 3 Medinas, not 1 Medina, 3 Medinas. And if in this region where I picked the fruit from, if there is somewhere in this region, some of it's still out there in the field, then I'm still allowed to consume it. The moment there's nothing left in the field, then I'm obligated to do what we call biur peiros shvi'is. Biur peiros shvi'is is a big machlokes Rishonim what that means. Some of the Rishonim understand you have to burn it. You have to burn it like biur chametz. Other Rishonim learn, no, you have to simply take it out of your house. You have to declare it ownerless. And at that point, anyone can take it, including you, and then you can take it back and eat it. Whatever biur, however it means, that's the case of it being mischaleles, not that the original item becomes chulin, but that the new item becomes bound to Shemitah. Elu ve'elu misbayim b'shvi'is.
Why do you not have to? Why does it have to secure the 3 cities? I don't understand.
Let's go weiter. Now, let's go further. Now that the meat, which is already not that which grew, it's the item that now acquired through chilul, through mekach, it acquired the kedusha. Now what? Let's keep on moving. Now, let's say the guy who wanted the meat changed his mind. He doesn't want meat. He saw his neighbor has fish. So he sold it through barter. It doesn't have to be through money. He exchanged it. Lokach b'basar dagim. Now is the vart. Since the meat did not grow on Shemitah, so the meat is taka yotzer l'chulin. The meat now is like bedek abayis. So yotzer basar, but the fish now will be bound by all of the laws of Shemitah. And let's go back. Lokach, but there's no end to it. In other words, it doesn't get, after a couple of exchanges, it gets weakened. The point that Baraisa wants to make is you can make 1,000 barters. The rule will be the same. The first item will remain holy. From everything else, the last one is holy, and the second to last and the third to last is chulin. That's it. Only the last remains holy. So lokach b'dagim yayin yatsa dagim v'nechnas yayin. Lokach b'yayin shemen, yotze yayin v'nichnas shemen. So this is the phrase, Haketzad, achrein nichnas b'shvi'is. Only the last item in this chain will be imbued with the kedusha of shvi'is, and all of the items that are not the last will be chulin aside of the first. Upri atzmai asur. Okay, that's the end of the brisa. Now, how does this brisa substantiate? How is this a proof to Rabbi Lazar? I'll tell you how. Because the brisa only used the word lakach. And you know what? If this brisa would have held the way Rabbi Yechanan later says, that this concept of you transferring the kedusha can happen even through a not sale, even just through, let's say, a declaration. If that would have been the case, dafke, because the brisa gives so many exchanges, the brisa should have varied how the exchange was made. You know, to teach you a milsa gavurcha. The brisa only says lokach, right? Lokach basa b'dagim, lokach b'dagim, lokach yain b'shemen. You know, the brisa should have not only added more items, the brisa should have said mechalel, a person who did a verbal declaration, even the same owner. If I own meat and I own fish, and I could have said, you know what, the kedusha should go to the fish. The fact that only lokach, that's all it's written. Alma zaraya that this whole power of transferring the kedusha, whether you're removing it, which you can't from the original, but you could from the second, you could from the third. However, it's going to be done only derech mekachin, derech chilul. So and this brayse will be a source for Rabbi Elazar. We're not going to refute Rabbi Yechanan because Rabbi Yechanan has another brayse. Tanya kavasad Rabbi Yechanan echad shvi'is ve'echad meiser sheni. Both of them could be deconsecrated. Again, not the same. By meiser sheni, the product that grew from my land over there in the Golan Heights, when I exchanged it on money, which I'm allowed to do, either because we just read this in Parshas Re'eh, ki yirba mimcha derech, or because ki yirchak mimcha hamakim, whatever justification, then the product that grew of meiser sheni, mamash chulin. The money is mois meiser sheni. The money has to be taken to Yerushalayim. The money has to be used exclusively to buy food and drink. And we're not to get confused. By Shemitah, it's not that way, as we just learned. The original item always remains holy with Kedusha Shemitah. But we're not looking at that. We're looking at it being transferred to something else. And you could transfer Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni, by the way, doesn't only have to be transferred on money. Meiser Sheni can be transferred on other food. Let's say I want to schlep food, but bananas are going to turn yellow-brown quick. I want to exchange it on another food item that will have a longer shelf life. That's another reason why you'll exchange it on food. So you can exchange Meiser Sheni, you can exchange Shemitah, not only on money, but on other things. The question is on what things? Oh, so you can only exchange it on food. Question is what food? What about living animals? That's the machlekes in this Tanach. That echad shvi'is ve'echad meiser sheni, yes, mischalelin al behema chayev ha'oif, you can transfer or imbue its kedusha on a domesticated animal, on a non-domesticated animal, on a fowl, and here is the chiddush. Avada, if it's already a product ready to eat, if it's geshachten, says Rabbi Meir, bein chayin u bein shchutin, even if it's alive. By the way, that's a great way to keep things fresh. So now you go ahead and you take the animal to Yerushalayim. Chachamim hold al shchutin, yes, mischalelin, but al chayin ein mischalelin. The question is, why not? So as the Chachamim say in this brayso, this is not a psad din Torah, it's not based on a pasuk, it's a gzeira de rabbanon. Gzeira shema yigadel mehem adorim. A person might want to raise these living animals into flocks. Now, what's the problem with that? We'll have to read the Rashi, because there's one issue by Meiser Sheni, there's a different issue by Shvi'is. So let's read inside Rashi, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amud. Shema yigadol mehem. What says Rashi? Yishem, Yashem, Etzloi. You're going to have them linger with you. You're going to keep them by you. You're not going to take them to Yerushalayim. Let's begin with Meiser Sheni. Legadol velodos. Because you're going to determine, wow, I want to have a whole flock of Meiser Sheni. And guys, your intent is always that whenever you'll decide to eat it, you're going to only eat it in Yerushalayim. So you don't know you're doing something wrong, but you are doing something wrong. Why? Because you are delaying the usage, the consumption of Meiser, here Meiser Sheni. And who says there's a problem? Because Vahatera Amra, Shana ve'achalta, which is ideal, positive commandment is for the Meisers that are separated on this year. The ideal is that it should be consumed on this year. Not only is that a positive ideal, but if I didn't, I can consume it next year. I can consume it the next year. But there comes a point, which is twice throughout the 7-year Shemitah cycle, that I have to do biur meises. That's the beginning of Parshas Kisavim. Biur meises means, theoretically, guys, if I grow produce, even if I didn't even give it to the kohen, as long as I separated the truma, and I separated the meiser rishon, and I separated the meiser sheni, I did all those separations, that which remains is not tevel. Even if I didn't give it to the kohen. But there comes a point where I'm not allowed to hold in my possession things that don't belong to me. And that is, the twice is really, it's on the 4th year and on the 7th year. Rashi over here doesn't say 4th and 7th, he says at the end of the 3rd. He means on the 4th. It's really connected to Pesach of the 4th. That ve'im shara shayne v'shniya chayiv b'shlishis. Shlishis means the end of the 3rd. De facto, it's on the Pesach of the 4th. Levayir kol masreisav b'soif shana shlishis min habayis. You have to get it out of your house. Getting out of your house means not to, God forbid, dump it on the street. You have to give it to the right recipients. And that's the vidui maisres. Then, only then can you declare, I did everything that you told me. Not only did I separate it, I gave it to the kohen, I gave it to the Levi. I took it to Yerushalayim. Oh, and therefore, if you're going to raise it for flocks, they're living animals. Yeah, of course, they have a long shelf life. They can live on forever. Then you're not going to give it to the right recipients, or you won't take it to Yerushalayim. That's already violating the biur shvius. You won't even chop, there's a problem. So don't buy living animals. That's concerning my Sheni. What about shvius? Let's go Rashi. 3 lines for the bottom of the Amid. That's the whole point. When the Torah says lachem lahachla, as we learned today, it doesn't mean you have to eat it. You can even do some business with it. You can even sell it, but not as a business person. You may not accumulate product of Shemitah to become wealthy for storage, la'oitzer, or to become wealthy. Because v'atayra amra la'achla, right? That's the bach. That la'achla v'loy l'schayra. Not only that you may not do proper business with it, but there's another detail, that once this item is no longer found in the fields, Kevan, in your region, then not only can you not do schayra, you can't even keep it in your house as is. You have to go through the step of biur shvius. Was really you have to consume it before the time of the biur. And again, if you're going to buy animals and you might decide to keep them legadel adarim, you might want to raise flocks. You're going to breed them. You're not going to realize that no, that has to be consumed before the time of biur shvius. That is the gzeira of the chacham. Okay, so says the Gemara. Now, 1 second. So what do we see over here? That's the point. Before we go on, this Braisa, who is speaking about imbuing something else with the kedusha of Shemitah, doesn't say the word lakach. You see, this Braisa uses the word mischalalim. That's great. And we know that the word mischalalim in every other context is lav dafka through mekach. Mischalalim b'chlal, the bedek habayis. A person is allowed to donate an item for the bedek habayis, and that person himself can say, may the kedusha from this go into that. Mischalalim is not limited to a sale. The fact that this Braisa uses the word mischalalim, that's going to be the Tanya Kavasei the Rabbi Yechanan. So now we finish with that machlokes. But now that we quoted this Rav Meir and the Chachamim, comes along Rava and he limits this machlokes. Amar Rava, that the machlokes, again, the machlokes of Rav Meir and the Chachamim, that Rav Meir is not afraid. There is no gezeira shema yigadol hem adorim daf mem aleph on the top. That's only if you are being mischalel it on male animals. Male animals are usually not kept for breeding purposes. Female animals are kept for breeding purposes. Aval b'nekeva is even Rab Meir divrei hakol, that Rab Meir also won't allow you to be machalel mois ma'aser sheni or machalel peiroi shvi'is only on shchutin mischalelin, but v'al chayin, but on living animals ain't mischalelin, because even Ameir will subscribe that gezeda shem yigadol b'hem adarim. And by the way, the Chachamim don't argue, like Rashi writes on top of the Amid, right, that most people, usually male animals, are not kept for breeding, but the Chachamim make a loy plug. Loy plug, if male, females, don't do it at all. Loy plug. And guys, we're going to continue tomorrow. We are in Daf Mem Aleph, more about this machlokes between Rab Meir and the Chachamim, to be continued. How was the connection, guys?
Very good.
Good, perfect.
Because we have a physical wire. Baruch Hashem. All right. Shemitah Daf.
It's like leave life.